So when I took command of the ship, it hit me, um, the my way or the highway leadership style no longer works. And that if we're going to become the leader in our industry, I've got to change and become a better leader where I create a culture where people are treated with respect and dignity and where they take personal accountability for the results. And at the end of the day, it was 310 people taking personal responsibility, collaborating across departmental lines, which made us the leader in our industry.
This episode is brought to you by Namely. Running HR for a mid-sized business means you need software that can keep up with all you do, so you can focus on strategy, culture, and keeping your employees happy. That's why you should check out Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that makes life easier for your employees, your boss, and you. Namely's HR platform covers your essential HR and compliance needs in one place. Whether you have 50 or 1,000 employees, Namely's all-in-one integrated platform is designed to be used by everyone every day. With a mobile app and elegant UI, Namely lets employees request PTO, appreciate peers, review their pay stubs, and even answer their own HR questions. Namely offers it all, from onboarding and payroll to time tracking, benefits, employee engagement, and so much more. You'll finally have the time and data you need to drive the initiatives your company really cares about. That's why you should simplify your HR processes with Namely. So I've arranged a special offer for all of my listeners. Right now, you can get a free month of unlimited access to Namely's all-in-one HR platform, but you have to go to namely.com/FOW. That's namely.com/FOW, and you will get 1 month of Namely completely for free. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leading the Future of Work. My guest today is Mike Abrashoff, former commander of the USS Benfold and best-selling author of It's Your Ship, Management Techniques from the Best Damn Ship in the Navy. Mike, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you're actually the second person from the Navy I've interviewed. The first was a few years ago, David Marquet. Do you know David?
I've never met him, no.
Okay, so he, I think I talked to him a few years ago, and he had some really interesting stories on leadership from his nuclear sub. So I'm really, really excited to speak with you to talk about some of the things that you learned, because it seems like you had similar experiences and learnings, I should say.
Correct.
Why don't we start with just background information about you? So how did you get to become the commander of the USS Benfold? What was your background like that brought you to, commanding this ship? And for people not familiar, what is the USS Benfold?
It's a guided Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer, and I could carry 90 Tomahawk cruise missiles, and cost about $2 billion to build. Has a crew of 310 young men and women. Average age is 23 and a half years old.
Wow.
And
super young.
And only 10% have college degrees. So could you imagine a crew of 23-year-olds running a $2 billion organization? That's USS Benfold.
Wow, that's crazy. And how did you get to become the commander of this ship?
So in the Navy, you take on a successive series of jobs. And if you can rank, if you do outstanding performance at each job and demonstrate the ability to lead greater numbers of people, you go before a selection board. And it's a selection board of 9 admirals, and they choose the top 50% of the people you're up against to get command of your own ship. And if you don't get command of your own ship, your career is effectively over and you leave the Navy. So It's an up or out type deal where if you don't get command, you're asked to go elsewhere.
So you had to be a good leader and performer before you got the opportunity to even get to the Benfold. So this had to be like a pattern of success of being able to lead others effectively.
Yes, but as you can imagine, the military in the old days, command and control, my way or the highway type leadership, and that's what was rewarded back then. And so um, you can get results with the my way or the highway type leadership style, but you're never going to get outstanding results because you're not going to have the people to help you drive performance. And I couldn't run that ship on my own. I needed help, and I needed buy-in from 310 young men and women. So when I took command of the ship, it hit me. Um, the my way or the highway leadership style no longer works. And that if we're going to become the leader in our industry, I've got to change and become a better leader where I create a culture where people
Yeah.
are treated with respect and dignity and where they take personal accountability for the results. And at the end of the day, it was 310 people taking personal responsibility, collaborating across departmental lines, which made us the leader in our industry.
So it's interesting because, as I'm sure you know, a lot of people oftentimes turn to the Navy, the Army, to talk about why we have hierarchy inside of organizations, and they say, it all came from the Navy, the Army, the military, command and control style.
And it did.
Okay, I was
That's
just going
where
to say, is that accurate? Is that how things were in the Navy? Very command and control. Don't question your leaders. Don't admit weakness. Ask for help. Like just top down.
in the 50s and 60s when corporate America was finding their way, they looked to the military and they adopted that top-down command and control style. And our parents' generation would accept that,
Yeah.
but young people today don't accept that. And
Yeah.
people who have ambition and people who are smart, um, and because of social media, um, people now know what their friends are getting in different workplaces, and they're demanding the same in their work environment. And so, those that use the my way or the highway command and control, the quality of people that want to come work for you is going to become less and less quality, and you'll fall by the wayside.
So, what kind of a leader were you? When you were in the Navy, would you describe yourself as somebody who was at one point command and control? I give you an order, you do it, don't question me kind of person?
Well, I to an extent, but not to a great extent. And the problem is, as you climb the ladder and you gain more experience, you gain more insight, and you then start dictating the solution instead of listening to what's going on. And I had somebody very close to me, right about the time I was getting command of the ship, tell me that I don't listen anymore, that I tell people what the answer is. And I thought about it for 3 months every day. And then it hit me. The person's right. I don't listen anymore. I've become directive in nature, and that I realized it was an irritating habit that I just fell into over the years that I needed to change. So instead of telling people what to do and how to do it on the ship, I go, if you own this ship, how would you do it? Or what do you think? To me, the four most powerful words in the English language are, what do you think? So I stopped telling people what the solution was and said, what do you think? And when they came up with the solution, then they took ownership of the problem, and that lifted burdens off my shoulders. And what do you think became it's your ship, which is what I would tell my sailors, and that became the title of my book.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that kind of evolution that you've seen over time. So when you took over of the USS Benfold, so you get there, it's day one. So, well, actually, first, how did you find out that you were going to be commander?
So let me go back to the evolution. Um, we don't mean to become dictatorial and directive in nature, but it becomes the easiest way when we're under pressure at work, because it takes work to be a more inclusive leader that
Yeah.
listens to people. And so, what I find in business today, and I've been out for 21 years, is nobody wants to be a lousy boss or mean to their people, but they develop bad habits and they don't have the self-awareness to understand how they're being perceived. And to be quite honest, I'll tell you the rest of the story. What gave me the self-awareness was the day I took command of the ship. And as my predecessor was leaving the ship for the final time, and as his departure was announced on the public address system, my new crew stood and cheered at the fact that he was leaving. And in my entire career, I'd never heard of or seen such a blatant sign of disrespect. And that caused me to take a step back and evaluate how I was being perceived. And I didn't have good self awareness. And I realized it was something that I needed to improve on.
So they really didn't like this person, huh?
He was a brilliant man. I have nothing against him. The
Yeah.
crew didn't like him
Yeah.
because he was very brilliant, but he micromanaged the crew to death, and to the point where they stopped doing it because he would do it. And so, and so I couldn't change anybody out when I took command.
Yeah.
And we were near the bottom in performance. And just by getting them to collaborate and work well together and to take pride in themselves and take pride in their work, 15 months later, we get the trophy for being the best ship in the Pacific Fleet.
Wow.
So the talent was always there. It's just that they were demotivated by the leadership style that was present on the ship.
So let's talk a little bit about how you were informed that you were going to be the commander, and then we can talk about, day one when you show up and you find out the state that everything is in. So where were you when you were notified that you were indeed going to be the commander of the Benfold? And did this ship have a reputation as being towards the bottom as far as performance?
So I was, prior to getting command, I was the number 2 assistant to the Secretary of Defense.
Okay.
I was the junior military assistant. And my job for him was for 27 months. I worked for him personally. And he left office on the 20th of January, 1997. And he says, Mike, you can go back to the Navy then. And so that's when I got assigned to USS Benfold. And it was, okay, 4 months of training. You're leaving in January. What ship is open in May or June of the following, 4 months down the road? And that was the science behind my assignment.
Just what's available. Where can we get Mike?
Right. So that's the way it is for anybody. I mean, I wish I could say there was a lot of planning.
Yeah.
I could have just as easily been assigned to one of the best ships. But I didn't know the extent of the rot on the ship. Retention was awful. We had one of the worst retention rates. We had one of the highest accident rates, some of the poorest performance metrics. And it's like buying a house and then you find out that you have termites and everything else. That's what I found out once I got there. And so then I realized the enormity of the problem and that I can't fix it on my own and that I need, to engage them, my sailors.
So what are performance metrics? I mean, for an organization, I think a lot of people know performance metrics, right? We look at revenue, we look at profit, growth, we look at headcount, we can look at performance, stock price performance. For a ship, what are the metrics that you were looking at that put it so far down the pack? I mean, obviously you mentioned safety, turnover, but what does performance mean for a ship like that?
So my ship could execute on 6 mission areas.
Okay.
And one of them is employment of Tomahawk cruise missiles. And so you get evaluated on your ability to launch a certain number of cruise missiles within a certain amount of time and have it fly 1,000 miles and land within, a 95% probability within 25 feet of its target.
Okay.
So in every mission area, I've got to be able to shoot torpedoes at enemy submarines. I've got to be able to shoot guns both at land targets and other ships. And so we are evaluated on every one of those missions, in addition to engineering and safety and things like that. So every aspect of our performance is evaluated and judged against other ships.
Got it. So it seems like with those metrics, you guys are near the bottom as far as being able to do those things.
Well, the big one was the ship flunked their engineering certification prior to my arrival.
That's not good.
So you're right. That was the mother of all inspections that they failed. And so that puts you, near the bottom automatically.
Okay, makes sense. So you get there. It's day one. You're the commander of this ship. What's going on? You show up to the Benfold. Do you just see like people throwing stuff at each other? It's just chaos everywhere. Nothing's getting done. Like what's going on day one?
So I see my predecessor getting cheered off the ship, and then it hit me, what do I have to do to keep that from happening to me 2 years from now when I leave the ship? And then it hit me, I may never get promoted again. I may not be smart enough to do this job. And I may never get promoted, but from this day forward, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure my sailors stay safe and that we can safely execute on our missions. Because what drove me at that point wasn't self-promotion. It was never having to write the parents of any of my sailors telling them that their sons or daughters weren't coming home because we didn't give it our best. So the first thing I did after seeing my predecessor getting cheered off the ship, I brought my we have 5 departments on the ship. And I have got to rank my department heads 1 through 5. And only the top 1 or 2 will ever get command of their own ship. And if you don't get command, as I told you, you don't get promoted. And so that causes the 5 department heads to be hyper competitive with each other to the point of operating as independent silos. So I hated the system as I went through it, and I decided to change it on that very first day. And I said, from this day forward, that your number 1 factor in your ranking is going to be how well you collaborate with each other and how well you drive collaboration to the lowest levels in your department. And so I changed the factors on how to evaluate the most important people on the ship, the department heads. And to their credit, they started collaborating with each other, and they drove it down. And so suddenly it unleashed all this potential that was always there, but was never taken advantage of.
So when you say change the metrics, because that's interesting, and I think a lot of people would be really interested to know, how do you measure collaboration? Because it's something a lot of organizations would love to do to get people to work together in teams. So what were the metrics that your leaders were being evaluated on, and what did you change them to?
So I can't give you firm metrics, but I know it when I see it. And from that day forward, I said, look, you may have disagreements, and that's okay. If you can't solve them among yourselves, then bring it to me and I will make the decision. But don't ever come into my office and backstab a fellow department head unless you bring that department head with you. So the days of backstabbing came to an end, and it forced them to work out their differences. And there were times when I had to get involved, but it was after honest efforts on everybody's part to do it. And then at the end of the day, I have to make the decision on what's best for the ship. And they salute and they execute on it.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I had one of the executives from Netflix on the show a while ago, and this was a couple of years back, and she was telling me that this one time an employee came to her and he was basically trying to backstab one of the other employees that were there and saying, oh, this person's not doing their job. They're keeping me from doing my job. And she says, okay, hang on a second, just wait right here. And she goes out for a couple of minutes, and she brings back the person that he was complaining about and said, okay, now tell them to their face directly what you were just telling me.
Exactly right.
And of course, Netflix is famous for having this very kind of candid culture, very transparent culture. Not for everybody, mind you. Not everybody can take that kind of feedback. But it sounds like that's what you were trying to institute, of like, no more backstabbing, figure your problems out directly with people, be an adult.
So when I worked in the Secretary of Defense's office, the senior military assistant was a 3-star Army general. And the Army has a wonderful program that I lifted and took to Benfold. It's called the After Action Review. Mm-hmm. And after every process we did on the ship and after every event, everybody involved would gather around my chair on the bridge and we would critique it. In the ground rules, where you would talk about what it was you were trying to do, what the conditions were, what worked, what didn't work, what would we do differently in the future. In the ground rules, where you check your ego at the door, there's no retribution for what gets said, and anybody in the group can respectfully challenge anybody else. in an after action review, the lowest ranking seaman involved could challenge me in public, respectfully, of course. But if they didn't understand something I did, they could call me on it. And sometimes I did things the way I always did it, not having the awareness as to how it was going to impact them and their ability to execute. And when it was pointed out to me, it's like, gee, I never realized it. So I would change. And sometimes they didn't understand something, maybe the requirements placed on me. It allowed me to have a coachable moment.
Yeah.
But in the after action review on Benfold, you check your ego at the door and you can talk about anything and not get your feelings hurt and all it is designed to do better next time and avoid the same mistakes. And so our strength was, we made our share of mistakes. We never made a big one. And because of the after action review, we never made the same mistake twice.
It's interesting you mentioned ego, because that's something, and as I'm sure you know from a lot of the work that you do with organizations, the ego can be a big problem inside of a lot of organizations. What did you personally do to make sure that your ego didn't take over? Because your title is literally commander, which is, literally command others. So how did you keep your ego from just taking over? And
I found that the more command I gave up, the greater control I got over the organization. And my influence increased when I gave up power. And ultimately the power came back to me. So, at this point, when you're not driven by your next promotion, it frees you up to do the right thing for the right reasons. And so I had given up any thought of ever getting promoted. And ironically, because the crew turned in great performance, I got promoted 4 years ahead of my classmates to full bird captain. So at a time when I stopped caring about my next promotion, I got it 4 years ahead of time. So, and it was because of the performance they turned in. But I guess it has to come from. So when I worked for the Secretary of Defense, I'm his number 2 assistant. And the 3-star is our most important 3-star job in the military. Colin Powell had the job as a 3-star.
Yep.
Admiral McRaven, the guy who planned the raid that captured bin Laden, had the job as a 3-star. And whenever the 3-star is off work, for whatever reason, they bring in a visiting 3-star to do the job because it's so critical.
Okay.
Well, the general's son got ill and almost died and was off work for about 45 days. And William Perry said, let Mike do it. I'm 34 years old. And I didn't do it as elegantly as Colin Powell did. I was working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for 45 straight days. And it wasn't always pretty, but I never let one ball drop. And the general's son recovers. He comes back to work, goes in to see the secretary for a private conversation. And what they never knew was when they were having a private conversation, I would always stand in the doorway listening to their private conversation. I called it intelligence gathering. And the general goes in and says, Dr. Perry, how did Mike do in my absence? And William Perry looked up and said, Paul, Mike did great. I consider you and him interchangeable now. And what William Perry unwittingly gave me that day was validation. And the validation gave me the confidence to go be a better ship captain and to not lead by my ego, but through results. And so when a lot of people that I work with, when I see them leading through their ego, it's because they never got validation from somebody that they respected and admired. And so they have to be a butthead in order to satisfy an internal driver that they never got from an external source.
This episode is brought to you by Namely. Running HR for a mid-sized business means you need software that can keep up with all you do. That's why you should check out Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that makes life easier for your employees, your boss, and you. Namely's HR platform covers your essential HR and compliance needs in one place. Whether you have 50 or 1,000 employees, Namely's all-in-one integrated platform is designed to be used by everyone every day. Namely has it all, from onboarding and payroll to time tracking, benefits, employee engagement, and so much more. You'll finally have the time and data you need to drive the initiatives your company really cares about. Right now, you can get a free month of unlimited access to Namely's all-in-one HR platform for being a listener of this show, but you have to go to namely.com/FOW. Again, that's namely.com/FOW to get your free month of unlimited access. So what was actually wrong with the Benfold when you took over? Like what were the issues and the problems that you saw? I mean, obviously you talked about the performance metrics and why those weren't where they needed to be, but why not? What was it that kept the employees, the sailors, from achieving the goals that they needed to achieve?
Because they were treated so poorly and demeaned and debased from all levels of the chain of command.
Okay.
Instead of being out front and taking action. And I didn't realize this till I left the ship, that during that time, sailors had their own hideouts on the ship where they could go and hide during the workday so that nobody could find them.
Wow.
And so that they couldn't get yelled at. So it was a toxic culture of treating people poorly. And as a result, everybody wanted to leave and nobody wanted to do extra. And so that's what I inherited. And I had never seen it to this extent before in my career. And just piling on and treating them even worse wasn't going to get people the results I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I really had to try something new.
So when you say not treated well, what does that mean? Is that like they were just yelled at? Other people were taking credit for their work. They weren't getting enough sleep. Things were being thrown at them, cursing at them. What does not being treated well mean?
I don't know that anybody ever threw anything at them, but they were demeaned, yelled at, ridiculed.
Wow.
They were sleep deprived. And because it came from the top, every echelon of the chain of command did those same behaviors. So it was survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And
like Lord of the Flies over there, huh?
right.
Yeah. That probably creates a pretty tough environment to thrive in.
Well, and we're talking about young kids and making an
Yeah.
impression. And, this could either transform their lives or, delay their development to become productive members of the workforce.
Yeah.
And it was an obligation that I took seriously. And so I wanted to leave the place in better shape than when I found it. And that's what drove me every day, was being better than we were the day before.
Okay, so you become commander, you're aware of these issues, you're aware of what's going on, your predecessor leaves, and now it's your turn. Right? You're the commander, you need to make change. Where do you start? What were some of the things that you put into play immediately, and what were some of the things that took a little bit more time for you to implement inside the Benfold?
I started interviewing sailors every day.
Okay.
And I eventually interviewed all 310 sailors on the ship.
Wow. How long did that take you?
4 or 5 months.
Okay.
I would do 4 or 5 sailors a day individually.
Okay.
And in these interviews, I got to know their names and their spouse's name and their children's name and their hometowns, what their goals were in their life. And I kept an index card on every sailor. And I had a photo taken of them. I stapled the photo to the index card, and just little facets about their life that when I had a free moment, I would just review my index cards. So then when I saw them in the passageway, I'd say, hey, how's your kid doing in soccer? Or,
Interesting.
So it's just...
it's like the old school, like way back in the day when you used to go to a clothing store or a bank teller before we had technology. That's what they would do, right? Is they would keep all your information on an index card, and when you would show up, they would say, hey, how's your kid going? It's kind of like an old school getting to know your people as a human being approach, which I love. I mean, we don't have enough of that, in my opinion, inside of companies at all.
So in the interviews, after I got to know them, I'd say, well, what do you like most about this ship?
Yeah.
What do you like least? What would you change if you were the captain? And I had a public address microphone right at my desk. And if I got a great idea from a sailor, I hit the button right then and there. And I'd say, Benfold, this is the captain. This is the idea I just got, and this is who I got it from. It makes sense to me. We're going to implement it right now. I want your full support. So, I mean, even the officers and chiefs, some of the first time they found out about these ideas was when I got on the public address system. And if the military purists would say this isn't the right way to use the chain of command, that you should inform them first. But I wanted to shock and awe the crew to let them know I'm listening. And if your ideas make sense, you're going to get the credit for it. And so the key was giving them credit publicly on the public address system
Oh.
that this is who gave me the idea. And then that spurred more ideas. And they came armed to these interviews
Yeah.
with ideas of stuff that was just bugging them that needed to be changed, and nobody would ever listen.
How do you balance that though? Because I know one of the things that a lot of leaders struggle with is not things that you say yes to, but also being able to say no to things. And so, 300 plus sailors, if all of them come to you with a couple ideas, you're now over 1,000 ideas. How do you, and especially if you're not talking about this with everybody, you're just kind of announcing it right away. How do you know what to implement, what not to implement? Did you ever implement an idea that ended up being bad?
I'm sure I did, but I bet you 30% of the ideas I couldn't implement
Yeah.
because of restrictions placed on me, budgetary restrictions. And I'd look them in the eye and I'd say, I appreciate your thought on this, but this is why we can't do it. And what businesses do is ask for input and then never give them any feedback.
Yeah.
And you know what? People are adults. You give the idea, you owe them the courtesy of giving them a yay or nay.
Yeah.
And so 30% I could implement right on the spot, 30% I could discard right on the spot. But it was that middle 40% where I would say, I understand your frustration with this process. Here are my objections. If you can overcome my objections, come back and talk to me. And the best ideas that we got came when I had an objection and they went back to the drawing board and figured out how to overcome my objection. And in the process, they took ownership of that idea.
I love that.
And so what a lot of businesses do, give us the ideas and then they take it on their shoulders to implement. No, you give me an idea, you're going to be part of the implementation team. That gets more responsible ideas, more actionable ideas when they know that they're going to be part of the implementation.
So what were some of these ideas that you implemented, or some of the ideas that were given to you that you implemented?
So we changed the work hours on the ship. And San Diego is where our ship was stationed, is a high cost of living area. And I had sailors who couldn't afford to live in San Diego. So I had sailors living in Tijuana. I had sailors living in San Bernardino, which is a 2-hour drive from the ship. And our work hours were from 7:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. My sailors are sitting in traffic in the morning. They're sitting in traffic in the evening, spending time away from their families, wasting fuel, wasting money, all because 7:30 to 4:30 is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And one sailor in the interview says, why don't we move our work hours to 6 in the morning, work right through till 1 in the afternoon? And the dirty little secret in the Navy is no work gets done after lunch. Productivity just plummets. And what this sailor was giving me the opportunity to do was to work 7 straight hours, serve lunch at the end, and I get more productivity. They get to save money and fuel. They get to spend more time with their families, and it's a win-win situation. So that was one that I implemented. I talked to my officers and chiefs to get their buy-in, but it's one that we implemented, and we were the only ship where you work from 6 till 1, and then you get a lot of free time off to go do what you need to do.
And
that's what this home, working from home thing is about right now.
Yeah.
Is that it gives people the freedom to take care of the issues that are important to them that they were never able to do when they were sitting in a cubicle at work. And so, and I'm on the one hand, I hear from people that don't want to go back to the office, And then I hear from leaders who say, I want them back in the office. We're having this big clash. And you got to meet in the middle. And
Yeah.
that's what I did by adjusting work hours, was meeting in the middle. I still get the work done. They still come to the ship, but I'm saving them fuel money in the process. And I give them more time in their schedule to
Yeah.
take care of their family.
And can you share maybe one or two more ideas that you implemented?
So one sailor who was on the deck force that did chipping and painting all day long asked me if I knew how many times we painted the ship in the previous 12 months, and I didn't know. And he said 6 times.
Wait,
And
6 times in 12 months?
yeah, and it takes 2 months to paint the ship, so they're constantly painting.
Non-stop painting?
Right. Well, that's $5 an hour work,
Yeah,
and it's
that's crazy.
demoralizing work.
Yeah,
And I
that's
said, well,
crazy.
what's your solution? And so what the Navy was doing was we give contracts to the lowest bidding contractor who uses substandard materials to put stuff on the ship. And so when they add a new piece of equipment topside to the hull of the ship, they use ferrous metal bolts, washers, screws, fasteners, whatever, that rust in salt water. And the sailors are spending their days chipping and painting the running rust that's caused from this equipment that the civilian contractors are putting on us.
Hmm.
And he says, why don't we change the materials that we use that are non-corrosive? Brilliant idea. Spent $25,000, changed out everything we could, didn't have to paint the ship again for the next 10 months. And
Wow.
and that was implemented on just about every ship in the Navy. And now when they buy something for the ships, they've got to take into account total cost of ownership of how the sailors have to spend their days maintaining the equipment, because there was no talking between the people who procure the equipment and the people who have to operate it. And so the procurers never took into account the hours needed to maintain it. They never
Yeah.
took into account total cost of ownership. And because this sailor came up with that idea, they now have to take into account how the sailors have to spend their time maintaining the equipment that the procurers are buying. So it
Yeah.
caused a conversation at the highest levels in the shipbuilding community.
Wow. Yeah, those are great examples. That you're right. I mean, if you wouldn't have been listening to your sailors, you would have never received this feedback or gotten this information. So I think it's a great lesson for a lot of leaders out there. When you think about your time, what was the most impactful moment during your time as commander? Was there a particular situation or event that you think profoundly impacted who you are as a person or as a leader?
So I had been in command 2 months, and it was time for us to leave San Diego and go on our first deployment to the Middle East. And the first 7 days of the transit was spent doing a major exercise designed to increase our ability to defend ourselves. And we're doing this exercise with two other ships, USS Harry W. Hill, USS Gary. Um, and the exercise was to be over the following Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., at which point we'd enter Pearl Harbor and spend the night in Waikiki. And the way we enter port in the Navy is by the date of rank of the senior officer on each ship. The admiral was on Harry W. Hill. They were to go in first. I was the junior captain by age and by date of rank. We would always go in last. And so instead of being over at 5 p.m. that Friday, the exercise is unexpectedly over at 9 a.m. in the morning. We had achieved all the objectives. The admiral declared it a success. And we're sitting off the coast of Waikiki, steaming in circles, wasting fuel, wasting taxpayers' money, waiting for 5 o'clock because that's what the plan called for.
Hmm.
And I'm there thinking, this is stupid. Why aren't we on the beach? So I call the captain of the Harry W. Hill, and I'm calling him on an encrypted satellite voice radio that any sailor on any of the three ships can punch in the button and listen to the conversation. And I said, why don't you ask the admiral to go in early? He said, I can't. I've got an engineering problem. I can only fix it at sea. Call the captain of the next ship, USS Gary. He was a fire breather, my way or the highway. He excoriated me on the radio, yelling at me. I'm sure he was spitting into his microphone when he was yelling at me,
Wow. So he went off on you, huh?
for everybody, for all sailors to hear,
Wow.
all
Like
three ships.
cursing, what the F is wrong with you? Why would you like?
He didn't swear, but it was, what is wrong with you? You're the
Yeah.
junior captain, you're the junior ship, you're going in last. And so I called the admiral who'd been listening to the conversation. And then he had a gruff voice and he said, "Why should I grant Benfold something I'm not granting the other two ships?" And I said, "Well, sir, the exercise is over early. We're steaming in circles, wasting fuel, waiting for 5 o'clock to roll around." I said, "I've got a piece of broken equipment I can only fix in port." And I said, "Reason number 3, I want to put my crew on the beach early in Waikiki that day." And the real reason I wanted to go to the beach, I wanted to go to Waikiki. Um, and so he said, "Permission granted." I was 2 decks above the operations center where 30 sailors were on watch. When he said "permission granted," I could hear cheering through 2 decks of steel. And we have 4 engines on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. And our normal configuration is only to steam on 1 engine because it's our most fuel efficient. You can do up to 18 knots on 1 engine. So everywhere we go, unless it's an emergency, it's 18 knots or less. But you can do 24 knots on 2 engines and use twice the amount of fuel. You can do 27 knots on 3 engines, and you can do 31 knots on 4 engines. When the admiral said "permission granted," I put all 4 engines online, came up to full power. When an Arleigh Burke class destroyer is at full power, it kicks up a rooster tail of water that's 2 stories high.
Wow.
The whole ship vibrates from the power. It is an amazing display of technology. And we scream into Pearl Harbor, tie it up at 10:15, cruise off the ship at 10:45 on their way to the beach. Never did save 1 drop of fuel that day. And the next day we get underway to continue our transit to the Middle East. And the first sailor comes up for his interview that day. And he said, "Captain, it seems to us, the crew, that you don't care if you ever get promoted again." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "What you did for us yesterday," he said, "you had nothing to gain. You did it for us. We want you to know we got your back." And that was the day that the crew for the first time started to trust me, when they realized that what I was doing was for them it was for us instead of just for me. And that was when your people trust you and when your customers trust you, that's the foundation for a strong business relationship.
Yeah.
And from that day forward, the crew trusted me, and it was an obligation that I took seriously to never violate that trust. And, I would spell out the direction. They don't get a vote on where we're going, but they get a vote on how we get there. And
That is a fantastic story.
no thanks.
I love that story. Thanks again for tuning into this episode with Mike Abrashoff. Remember that if you subscribe, you will get access to a bonus episode with Mike where he talks about how to listen aggressively, how to see your organization through the eyes of your employees, and how to create a culture of trust. It's only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, which again is less than the cost of a cup of coffee a month. And the bonus episode alone is worth the cost of that subscription. But if you do subscribe, you're going to get access to a bonus episode every single week from one of my amazing guests, which includes CEOs, best-selling authors, psychologists, researchers, and leaders in various industries. You're also going to get access to ad-free listening and early access to new episodes. I hope you decide to subscribe and support the show.